Firstly, on behalf of the government, with my colleague and friend, the Minister of Finance, I truly want to express my gratitude and appreciation to Tony Shepherd and to the Commissioners and to Peter Crone and the Secretariat on their enormous effort in putting together the recommendations of the Commission of Audit. It is clearly a very comprehensive document that focused on, of course, the largest areas of expenditure, which also happen to be the fastest growing areas of expenditure in the Commonwealth budget. There are 86 recommendations. Some of the recommendations the government will be proceeding with in the budget. Other recommendations the government will not proceed with. Some other recommendations are clearly in the public domain for debate and discussion. What this report proves is that we have inherited a mess. The challenge now is to get on with the job of fixing the mess, and we will. In the budget, in May, we will outline the first word in responding to the major structural challenges left behind by our predecessors. The fact is that unless structural reform is undertaken, Australians will have a lesser quality of life in the future than they have today. And that's why we got on with the job of commissioning this report. That's why we got on with the job of dealing with some of the structural challenges that have been left behind by the previous government. I have no doubt that there will be many issues that are highly contentious and somewhat difficult for various stakeholders and some in the community to accept. But there is an overwhelming challenge here, and that is to ensure that the budget is structurally fit for the future. We are addressing it and we are focused on it. I'm going to ask the Minister of Finance to say a few words and then we'll throw it open to you.
Thank you very much, Treasurer. What the Commission of Audit report clearly shows is that the spending growth trajectory that we've inherited from Labor is unsustainable and needs to be addressed. What it shows is that on top of $123 billion worth of projected deficits we found after the election, the spending growth trajectory we inherited from Labor continues to deteriorate beyond the current forward estimates, unless we take corrective action. Now, the Commission of Audit makes recommendations on structural reforms and structural savings. The government in the budget will pursue structural reforms and structural savings which will build over time and which will help put us back onto a believable path to surplus. The question might be asked, why are we doing this? Well, to extend a theme very much defined by my good friend and colleague, the Treasurer, because our goal is to replace the age of entitlement with a new age of opportunity, where in a stronger, more resilient, more prosperous economy, everyone has the opportunity to get ahead. That's why we're so committed to repairing the budget mess we've inherited from our predecessors. That's why we're so committed to implement all of the policies to build a stronger, a more prosperous economy which we took to the last election.
So why don't we move from...
Some of the proposals are eye-watering when it comes to the politics of them. Page 244 of Volume 1 suggests that a couple with two children aged 4 and 6 would lose $8,077. Is that the kind of quantum that you're looking at when it comes to your welfare changes?
I want to lay down to you, this is not the budget. This is a report to the government, not of the government. And we have carefully and methodically gone through the recommendations. There are a number of recommendations that would be described as courageous, to use a term familiar to some in Canberra. There are some recommendations that represent common sense. When you see our budget, you'll understand that we are focused on responding to the challenge in a measured and methodical way. We're not going to cherry-pick a part of the report and say, well, that's it, it's all done, job over, the way the previous government did with the Henry report. We are going to go through all of the initiatives carefully, as we have done. Some will go to a Federation white paper in discussion with the states. Some, obviously, will go into other processes. For example, we've currently got a productivity inquiry into childcare. So there are other processes. Phil, sorry.
Nowhere in the report does it mention lifting income taxes. Where do you get off, if you like, with your plans? Sorry, I don't mean all that, but let me rephrase that.
Yeah, please.
Some people might
I'm not
ask,
an accountant.
Some people might ask, what do you say to voters who were told before the election there would be no increase, by the Prime Minister there would be no increase in taxes, and it's now clear that you're planning one this side of the next election?
Phil, the brief for the Commission of Audit was to deal with expenditure. We're going to have a tax white paper that is going to deal with the structural issues in taxation, and we'll take that to the next election. Frankly, can I say to you something? I mean, all this talk about broken promises and so on, of course we are endeavouring to keep our promises, and we will. But the bottom line is the Labor Party promised the budget would get back to surplus, and it never will. It never will. Because they left behind structural costs that will exceed the revenue that will come to the budget. So please, this idea somehow that everything we have ever said is going to be held against what has moved on us, because the previous government basically misled the Australian people about the state of the budget, is kind of ridiculous. However, we are keeping our promises. We are keeping our solemn promises. Now, that means that some of the initiatives that we have to roll out will occur after the next election so that we can get a new mandate. But we can't have a do-nothing budget, and we will not have a do-nothing budget.
If I might just add here as well, the recommendations in the Commission of Audit report invariably are for structural reforms and structural savings. The government is very much focused on implementing structural reforms and structural savings in the budget. However, structural savings, good structural savings, genuine structural savings, start low and build over time. Given the size of the task that we inherited from the previous government, there is a need for an immediate effort in the short term to get us in a stronger starting position as we embark on this important task to repair the budget. Now, our commitment is that special immediate effort is as fairly and equitably spread across the community as possible. Our commitment is to ensure that any immediate short-term effort is as well targeted and as well targeted as possible, and is time limited.
Does that mean that a deficit tax of some kind is absolutely locked in now because it's the only way to get the rich? And why do it if Labor and the other parties are going to block it in the Senate anyway?
Well, I mean, the implication of what Bill Shorten said the other day, who apparently doesn't want to do his bit to help repair the budget mess that Labor left behind, the implication of what he said when he argued that Labor would not be part of any tax increases is that 100% of the burden to deal with the legacy of deficits and debt that Labor left behind should be imposed on lower income families. Now, we don't think that's right. We think that it is important that the effort is spread fairly and equitably across the whole community in the short term, while the structural savings have got time to build up and deliver dividends over the medium to long term.
Sorry, we'll get through.
Mr Shepherd said to us earlier that his report quite deliberately started slow and built up because you needed to not hit the economy too hard and because you needed time to take people with you. So my first question is, why do you need to do something straight away and quick? Why can't the measures to hit the rich take time like these measures? And the second question is there anything, any of the measures in this report that you would rule out today?
No, we're not in the business of ruling in, ruling out today. Why? Because we've got a process that we're going through in relation to this report. And the first answer will be on budget night. That's the first point. The second point is some of the recommendations, even though they're very worthy, they're actually quite difficult to implement because I must say one of the surprises out of the Expenditure Review Committee process has been that the basic infrastructure of government hasn't been maintained. When I talk about that, I talk about the capacity of Centrelink, for example, with its massive computer systems, to be able to cope with changes in policy. And the computer system at Centrelink and the call waiting times and the interface with the community is under enormous pressure now and hasn't got the capacity to respond to significant and immediate policy change in all cases. The same can be said with Medicare. And that has been a surprise for us, which means we are, at the end of the day, going to have to spend a hell of a lot of money, in the billions, to try and repair the basic infrastructure of government to be able to deliver some of the policy changes. Now, the second key thing is there is an interaction between the policy initiatives that are outlined today and other policy areas, such as the interaction with the taxation system, that need to be properly taken into account, which means that even though the recommendations came in isolation, we have to look at the whole picture. Don't forget, this looks at the largest areas of expenditure, not the whole of government expenditure, and it doesn't look at the revenue side and it doesn't look at the timetable side and the interface with the community.
And just an additional point to make here is that the budget that the Treasurer and I are working on with the Prime Minister and the Cabinet will very much be a growth budget. Our commitment is to build a stronger economy that is more resilient and where we can create more jobs. This is an important part of building a stronger economy. So nobody should walk away with the impression that somehow we're going to pursue measures that are going to weaken economic growth. This is going to be a growth budget.
Exactly right. Mark?
Look, just a bit confused about the messaging. When you say that you will still keep all your pre-election commitments, surely one of them very clearly was no new taxes, no increased taxes. Does that mean that you keep to that in this term of government? Or are you saying because the situation you've been left in is worse than you were told by Labor, that you may need to concede on that?
You're asking us to speculate on the budget in a couple of weeks' time. We're not going to speculate on the budget. Our commitments prior to the election stand. Yep.
What do you say to the increasing number of Liberal MPs and senators who are today warning you not to go down a deficit levy or tax, and that doing so at any time, pre or after the election, is against what the party stands for?
Well, I'll just say to you, government payments overwhelmingly go to people under a certain level of income. Now, the deficit's been built up and expenditure has gone to everyone in the community. So everyone has to make a contribution to repair the deficit. That's a fundamental point. I think all of you would understand that it's so important that everyone contribute to the heavy lifting in repairing the budget. It has to be a national effort. And there are only certain policy levers that you have to ensure that everyone makes a contribution. They're very limited. Yes, sir.
Of business measures reviewed in this. Do you think business...
Sorry, what did you say?
There's $5 billion of business measures addressed in this Commission of Audit. Do you think that business is carrying enough of a load in terms of the cuts that are proposed in this report?
Well, that's a matter for the Commission. I mean, we've said we have to. The end of the age of entitlement means it applies to every stakeholder, including business.
Mr Hockey, I wonder, how do you feel about the prospect of handing 10% of your income taxing powers to the states as part of the federation reforms? And secondly, do you have a view on that, and do you have a view on this idea of changing the way the GST is distributed to the states that's raised?
If I could hand them 15% of my expenditure, I'd come out on top, I suppose, wouldn't I? But the bottom line is they're matters for the Federation White Paper. They're matters for the Federation White Paper. There is no doubt that structurally, from an economic perspective, the Federation is broken and it needs to be fixed. So the recommendation out of the Commission of Audit is in many ways obvious, and that's why Tony Abbott, before the election, said we are going to have a new federation that is going to come out of the Federation White Paper. Now, one of the initiatives that we've talked about, the Asset Recycling Initiative, represents a new step forward in the relationship between the Commonwealth and the states. And I don't know that it's received enough focus. It'll be a very important point of discussion between the Prime Minister and Premiers tomorrow. But that's a step forward, because that is helping to drive microeconomic reform across the country.
Jen Hewitt has been...
Oh, sorry, Jen, I can't see that.
Treasurer, you said that some of the recommendations were common sense and some of them were courageous. What category do you put the idea of tightening the assets test for eligibility for the pension, and particularly including the family home, in the longer term?
Well, again, I'm not going to respond to individual recommendations. However, as the Prime Minister said the other day, we'll have something to say about the age pension in the budget, but nothing will compromise our commitment not to change the age pension over the term of this government, first term of this government. Clearly, what you get out of the report is that changes in retirement income need to be planned well ahead, and quite clearly the fact that initiatives in relation to the age pension in the report stretch out to the mid-2050s, I think, is evidence that, well, it's just a reminder we've got to start planning now to give everyone confidence that they're not going to be worse off in the short term in relation to their retirement incomes. Paul.
In terms of getting back to surplus, how do you see the balance between taxation increases and spending saves?
Well, that'll be clear in the budget, but overwhelmingly it's fair to say that our savings in the budget will do the hard yards. And when we define savings in the budget, we're not going to define it to include tax increases, like the previous government did, where I think I was looking at the last budget, more than 60% of their so-called saves were new taxes or tax increases. We are not going to play those word games. Tax increases or tax revenue is not, so far as we're concerned, a saving from the government. It's taking, in some cases, and where necessary, savings from the community. Sorry, just give everyone a chance. Yep.
Mr. Hockey, do Australians go to the doctor too much, as Mr Shepherd just said? He said Australians go on average 11 times to the doctor each year. Is that a problem you'll be addressing?
Well, I don't accept the introduction of your question, but Mr Shepherd's entitled to his views, and as you can tell, it's a very frank and honest report, and that's, we don't necessarily agree with everything that's suggested. Sam.
Mr Hockey, the proposal in the report to mandate private health insurance for high-income earners, but to simultaneously strip them of the private health insurance rebate, does that fall into the courageous category or common sense?
Our support for private health insurance is well known. Right behind you, yep.
Treasurer, I just wanted to ask you, there's a fairly significant list of suggested privatisations in the report, up to 10. Can I just ask, philosophically, where do you stand on some of those, like Australia Post, ASC, etc.? And can you tell us whether you think most of them are in the medium term? Do you think any of them should be short term?
Well, I mean, the government has a policy right now to sell Medibank private. We're progressing that sale. There are a number of recommendations in relation to opportunities for further sales that have been made by the Commission of Audit. We are considering all of their recommendations, and the decisions that we ultimately make will be reflected in the budget.
Treasurer, do you agree with the proposition?
Treasurer, if, as you say, there are only certain policy levers available to you, why did you and the Prime Minister rule out tax increases before the election?
Well, tax is self-evidently going to increase because it's increasing as a share of GDP. Yes.
Treasurer, the The Commission clearly did not like the idea of increasing defence spending to 2% of GDP within a decade. Is that something that you feel you might take notice of, or will you stick with your commitment?
We're sticking with our commitment. Patricia now.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Treasurer, the Commission had some views about childcare being a very important part of the participation equation, and that if you want to spend more on childcare, taking that money away from paid parental leave, that it was more important. Do you agree with that proposition that, you know, if you want to increase childcare for nannies, as has been floated by Tony Abbott and your government, that you need to take from another area?
Look, participation will be, improving participation in work is going to be a key focus of the budget. Now, in relation to childcare, we have a Productivity Commission review. We're not going to make policy on the run. We hear what the recommendation is. We are sticking by the paid parental leave scheme that we're committed to because it improves participation. And we've got to increase. I mean, this budget will be a call to arms for the Australian people. If you have the capacity to work, we don't just want you to work, we need you to work. If we are to grow the economy, if we are to deliver prosperity, the hard yards are going to have to be taken by everyone. And out of that, the most vulnerable in the community will be able to have the sorts of confidence and protections necessary to reassure them that they'll be well taken care of. Last question. Oh, sorry, I need that.
Sorry. In your speech last week, you spoke about adhering to Labor's spending cap of 2% or less, growth cap, if you're going to...
No, I said they never adhered to it.
No, and you were saying...
Now they're expecting us to adhere to it.
Saying you need to adhere to it. I noticed today, I think it's page 47, it has, to match your surplus timetable, it has spending under 1% or even negative for the next 3 or 4 years, then it grows to over 2, about 2.5. Were you talking about an average over the 10 years where you want to be, or under 2, or are you prepared to go over 2?
Is we've got to have a credible plan to get back to surplus, because when we get back to surplus, we just start to pay down the debt that we've inherited. And if we pay down the debt we've inherited, we can, insofar as you can, we can inoculate Australia against the turbulence that inevitably will come sometime in the future in the global economy. Now, we're not going to turn this ship around overnight, but we are going to turn it around because we must. We can't keep heading into a cyclone and expect everything will be okay. And if there's anything that comes out of today, it is proof that the she'll be right attitude of our political opponents is not good enough and was never going to work. And someone was going to have to stand before you today and say the hard yards need to be done to fix the budget. It happens to be us, and it's the coalition in government, but we're ready for it because we all have to contribute.
If I can just add here an important point, because Labor keeps talking about their fiscal discipline. They kept talking about limiting growth to 2% real. But if you look at what Labor did, they always failed to meet their target. In fact, in the first year beyond the forward estimates, spending growth in real terms is 6%. If we kept to the spending trajectory of Labor, 3 times their so-called fiscal target. And if we kept to Labor's spending growth trajectory, Commonwealth spending as a share of GDP would head to 26.5% by 2023-24, a staggering 26.5% within the decade. That compares to 23.1% the last year of the Howard government. I mean, the spending growth trajectory that we inherited from Labor is unbelievable, it is unsustainable, and it's got to be fixed.
Can you keep the 2% average?
Well,
over
you'll
the cycle?
see our detail in the budget.
Okay, 2 more and then that's it. Is that okay?
And also on the big picture, you will reserve your comment on individual measures in this report, but the report sets out an ambition, or basically says that if done, these would cut spending in 23-24 by 60 to 70 billion. Now, do you accept that goal of reducing spending by that sum in that year? And therefore, do you accept that if you don't endorse a particular proposal in this report, you've got to find some other way of achieving the same spending cut?
Well, self-evidently, we have to make savings, genuine savings, by a certain amount. I mean, you know, you have to go into the economic assumptions behind their model, which may not necessarily be the same as Treasury. It could be higher or lower. I just say to you, there is much work to be done. We know that, and we're committed to it. And last question.
The Commission talks about how you could have a cap of 24% of taxation as a proportion of GDP. Do you accept that kind of measure? And just if I could ask Senator Cormann, as a proud West Australian, whether he would also like a per capita GDP share, GST share.
You can answer the last one first.
We took a commitment to the last election, which was very clear, and I've said this many times before, there will be no change to the GST, full stop, end of story.
And in relation to the first part?
Taxation as a proportion of GDP.
Look, we believe in smaller government, but it doesn't happen overnight. It's not going to happen overnight. I mean, we've got to be realistic about it. We've got to be realistic about getting the revenue to start to give us capacity to restructure the way government operates. And, you know, that's not going to be easy. It's very hard. But we've begun the process. And revenue, if the economy grows, revenue will grow. And then you've got your options on the table for tax reform. So what we've got to do is focus on growth. Where governments spend money, make sure you get more bang for your buck in the economy. And I think you'll see that at play in the budget. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you.